Yeah, looks like we're now officially on internet TV. Um, Welcome, everyone. I will admit it feels a little less formal, a little less like I'm on TV, just having a regular Zoom call meeting like we have been doing. Thanks all of you for being here. I'm seeing it looks like about 18 folks in attendance right now. I'm sure a few more folks will kind of drift in, and I'm sure many more will probably try and catch this up at a more convenient time on the YouTubes. So welcome to our January Ballard District Council meeting. Welcome to 2022. Happy New Year to all of you. Before we get kind of underway with talk about our agenda and what we're going to do tonight, I do just want to take 1 minute to step outside of the norm, if I can make my TV here work, and just mention, while it goes nowhere near enough to undo the many travesties that have been exploited on Indigenous people, we still want to respectfully acknowledge that the Greater Ballard area is on the ancestral lands of the Coast Salish people, and we honor with gratitude these lands and waters, which have been cared for by the Duwamish, Suquamish, and Muckleshoot people, past and present. Thank you all for having us. Thank you for being here, folks. So tonight we're going to focus a little bit on what you see behind my head, which is a whole new Ballard than many folks have known for many of the past decades. Obviously, things have been growing. I think it'd be fair to say exponentially around here. Lots of change, lots of new folks from all over the world and all over the country coming to live in Ballard, and some of them work in Ballard. So we wanted for a little while to try and delve into that topic and talk a little bit about how it has changed. So we're going to do that with a central discussion with City of Seattle demographer and strategic advisor Diana Conzaneri, who's here with us this evening. I'm going to let my co-board members, Dawn and Jody, speak and introduce her a little more specifically here in a few minutes. But I also wanted to, before we go further into that broader topic, give a few minutes to Claire Farrington, who's joining us also this evening. Claire reached out to us as a student at the University of Washington School of Urban Planning, where she is a master's candidate, working on a number of different interesting things. One of which relates to how Ballardites see and view their relationship to open space and green space, as I understand it. And with that introduction, Claire, I'm going to let you talk a little bit about your research and your work and what you're after from folks.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, thanks for letting me have a few minutes to talk. Like Brent said, my name is Claire, and I'm a master's student at UW in the urban planning program. So I'm in my second year of the program, and I'm working on my thesis research right now. I'm hoping to have it wrapped up in the spring is my goal. And so what I'm researching is how multi-unit residents in Ballard feel connected to the public, green, and recreational space in their neighborhoods. So I'm thinking about parks, trails, courts, fields, even street trees in the public right-of-way. And so I'm specifically interested in the relationship between multi-unit dwellers in this public open space, because as Brent just mentioned, our residential environments, especially in Ballard, have changed a lot and have become denser. And we see more legislation with more of that maybe on the horizon in other neighborhoods. And a lot of this missing middle housing lacks, traditional single family house yards and that access to private green space. And so I'm interested in how our public green space is serving people who live specifically in multi-unit buildings. And so that's what I'm basically studying, this relationship between people and place, and how people feel connected to this green space, and how that plays into their attachment to their neighborhood in general. And so I'm hoping to conduct short interviews with people, specifically, like I said, with multi-unit residents. And I'm defining that by basically if your housing unit shares at least one wall with another housing unit, I'm counting that as a multi-unit building. And So people who live in apartments and duplexes, triplexes, townhouses. So I'm hoping that people will be willing to schedule short interviews with me, maybe 30 minutes, where we just have a conversation about how you feel about Ballard and your neighborhood, and then how you feel about the nearby green and recreational spaces near you. So if anybody on this call is interested in having an interview with me, that'd be great. If there's anybody you know who you think might be interested, please feel free to share this. I would be happy to talk to anybody. And if there's anywhere you think like, oh, you should reach out to that specific group, that would be a good place to do a call for participants through. I'd love to hear that too. So I will drop my email in the chat. And so if anybody is interested, just feel free to email me. Yeah, and thank you for giving me a little bit of time.
Claire, thank you very much. Appreciate your taking time to come and do this in person. It sounds like really interesting work. Hopefully we can get some folks to connect to you. We'll be sure and also post information how to reach you on our website and social media stuff so people can follow up later. Would also, I guess, kind of tag on to what Claire is doing in terms of trying to reach folks who are living in multi-unit housing spots, and say that we're looking for participation and engagement from folks like that as well all the time. We tend to be a group of a lot of single family residents, but we don't necessarily want to be that. We want to be representing all of Ballard. So I encourage anybody who kind of knows or is in that demographic to join us more frequently at these meetings, and encourage you to reach out to Claire. Claire, I'll just mention also, I assume you're familiar with, in the Ballard area, the Groundswell Northwest organization. Have you talked to them at all? They would be a great connection for you as well. They've been a member of the Ballard District Council for many years as we've moved forward through the decades, and have had critical roles in the executive function of the Ballard District Council as well. But their central focus is basically trying to enable and generate more open space and park space and green space for folks in Ballard, and surrounding Northwest Seattle communities. So we're happy to put you in connection with them too, and want to send a thank you and a shout out to anyone, Dennis Galvin or others who might be here from Groundswell Northwest as well. So with that, I'm just going to say thank you once again to Claire. Encourage you to feel free to stay around, Claire, and hand it off to Dawn Benson to say whatever more we're going to say before we try and get into the details of Diana's presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Brent. Hi there, I'm Don Benson. I'm on the Ballard District Council Executive Board, and I'm joining you by phone. Sorry about that. My Zoom link is erratic, hence the phone. I have the honor to introduce Diana Canzoneri, a senior policy analyst and population demographer for 12 years with the City of Seattle Office of Planning and Community Development. Diana provides analysis to inform neighborhood planning, long-range planning for growth management, and the development of housing policy. She also provides information on population characteristics of community conditions to officials and colleagues throughout the city. Demographers have a variety of ways of analyzing and presenting data that's interesting. I found that in the past in my working with various demographers on population data. But tonight we will kind of look at the data and trends in the city and Ballard, and we will look at because Ballard is really the second fastest growing neighborhood in the city. So Diana, welcome.
Thank you very much. I am looking forward to being able to present this information to you, and I think we're going to have an opportunity for questions as well. I'll be going through my slideshow, and I understand that other folks will be monitoring the chat, and you'll let me know if there are questions that I can answer. And my sort of approach here is to start by providing you with some kind of big picture analysis of the recent census data that we just got from the Census Bureau from the 2020 census, along with some takeaways on how the city and neighborhoods have been changing based on a comparison between prior decennial censuses and the current census. Then I want to show you some additional resources that we have available, including some analysis from our recently launched Equitable Development Monitoring Program. And I want to also show you where else on our website you can find some analysis on the growth that's occurred in urban villages and centers, including in Ballard, and give you also a link to the comprehensive plan website. And just want to plug that from the beginning. The city is going to be doing a major update of our comprehensive plan. The major update is actually due in like June of 2024, but we are getting started right now. And I do want to let you know that there's going to be plenty of opportunities for public engagement. And one of my hopes is that some of the information that I share with you tonight will be helpful in informing your personal participation and participation as a group in the comprehensive plan update. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And let's see.
Looks good.
Okay, excellent. All right, so we'll start with some takeaways from the 2020 census and look at some recent trends. First of all, though, I want to give you some basic background on what the decennial census is and how it relates to another really important data source that we have from the Census Bureau. So the decennial census, as I'm sure most of you are aware, is, it's done every 10 years to provide an official count of the population. It's a really short questionnaire. Actually, it only had 10 questions in 2020. It includes just basic topics: sex, age, race, ethnicity, household size and type, whether the household is an owner household or a renter household. There's some basic information about housing units, whether they're actually occupied or not, and then also group quarters, which are things like dorms and nursing homes and so forth. The American Community Survey, by contrast, is a continuous survey. It's done with about 1 in 500 households within a given month. So it's got, the estimates have margins of error, whereas the decennial census estimates, since those come from a full population, they don't have, sample-based margins of error, but the decennial census, I just want to note, is, not perfect. There is almost invariably a substantial undercount of people of color, of young children, and immigrants and refugees. So, as I'm presenting this information, please keep that in mind. Here I am showing you a list of all of the topics actually that are on the American Community Survey. So it's not just the basic demographics, but it's also a whole bunch of different housing topics, including things like housing and affordability, a lot of social and economic characteristics as well, such as educational attainment, income levels, etc. I am going to be focusing in the first half or so of my presentation just on the decennial census data that we now have from 2020, from what's called the redistricting data set. So the redistricting data set is the first set of decennial census data that we get at the local and neighborhood level every 10 years when we start to get the decennial census data. It doesn't have everything that even the decennial census releases will ultimately have. The redistricting data set just has the basic information that I've highlighted in green on this slide. And then we'll be getting later on this year, probably in the latter half of this year, more detailed information. So, for example, more information on detailed races and ethnicities, and on homeownership rates and so forth. And I will also be covering a little bit of the information from the American Community Survey when I talk about our equitable development monitoring indicators. So first of all, I'm going to just give you some basic numbers from the 2020 census. So the 2020 census count for Seattle's population is 737,015. Seattle's the 18th most populous city in the US, and our metro area is the 14th most populous metro in the US. Oopsies, sorry. It raced ahead. Okay. And let's see. Okay. Sorry for the scrolling back and forth. So a very high level on Seattle's population and housing growth. Seattle's 21% population growth from 2010 to 2020 was actually more than double the growth that the city experienced in the previous 2 decades. And also our 2020 population growth in Seattle was faster than King County's growth during the decade from 2010 to 2020. Our housing growth was also rapid. And, one thing to note, however, and it's not going to surprise anybody, I suspect, is that our population grew faster than our housing stock did.
Question on that, then. Is it fair to interpret from that, though, that it really only grew 2% faster?
2 percentage points, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And a note about Seattle's growth rate in context of what's been happening in cities in the US as a whole. So Seattle was one of just 14 cities in the US that grew by more than 100,000 from 2010 to 2020. I wanted to give you a quick look at what Seattle's racial and ethnic composition looked like in 2010 compared to 2020. So as you can see, the population of color, which is represented in all of the non-gray slices of these pies, went from being about 34% in 2010 to being almost 41% in 2020. And the Asian population was one of the fastest growing. People of color groups, also a population who are of 2 or more races, also went up substantially in 2020. About 7% of Seattle's population identified as more than one race. And just a little bit of a note on this is that the way people are categorizing their race or races and ethnicity, maybe undergoing some change between the decades here in the way that they're filling out the form. The Census Bureau provided more detail when they asked about race and ethnicity this time on the census form. And also, as somebody who's done my ancestry DNA and done my whole genealogical chart, and gotten my the report on my race and ethnicity from DNA, I just wonder how the results that some folks have gotten from outfits like Ancestry.com has changed what they've said on their census forms, if it has. I'd love to see a study on that. With respect to our age and racial and ethnic composition within age groups, one of the striking things is that children of color are now just over half of children in Seattle overall. So that is a milestone. At the same time, the rate of growth in the population of color among children and among adults has been much slower in Seattle than it has in the rest of King County. So now we're getting into some maps that I'm showing you, and the names that you see overlaid on the neighborhoods, those are community reporting area names. And these community reporting areas are just combinations of census tracts. The city of Seattle designated these so that it would make it easier to summarize census data. So each of these named community reporting areas has between about 1 and 4 census tracts, just for context. Also, another thing to note is that as I'm showing you these maps, any of the community reporting areas that you see shaded in sort of the bright and dark greens are areas that grew faster than the city as a whole did. So the city as a whole grew by a little bit over 21%. So all of those other brighter green and darker green areas grew faster. There's actually only one area that lost population, and that's the South Park community reporting area. So as you heard before, and I suspect it's not surprising to you, Ballard was the second fastest growing community reporting area in the city between 2010 and 2020. Cascade Eastlake, which is better known as South Lake Union and Eastlake, was the fastest growing. And in general, it was the areas in and around downtown and with ready access to downtown that did grow the fastest. So I'm just kind of zeroing in on Ballard and some of the other neighborhoods near Ballard, just to give you a sense of specific rates of growth. So, and I just listed them in order. So Whittier Heights grew about at about the same rate as the city as a whole. And then Sunset Hills, Loyal Heights, Greenwood Finney, and North Beach, Blue Ridge all grew less quickly. Here we are looking at the rates of growth for the child population by community reporting area on the left and the adult population on the right. And one thing to note here is that in and around Ballard, both the child population and the adult population grew. It's interesting to note, that that's in contrast to a lot of South Seattle, where the child population actually declined. Here we're looking at the rate of population growth among people of color on the left and non-Hispanic white people on the right. And as you can see, Ballard and several of the other neighborhoods around Ballard grew super, super rapidly in their populations of color. And most of the areas right around Ballard, also the non-Hispanic white population also grew, but there were some areas, especially in North Seattle, where the white population declined. So here I just wanted to provide some context for looking at the rate of growth for the population of color. So on the left, you have that same population of color growth map on the left. And then on the right, you have a map that's showing what the percentage of the population is who are people of color in each of those community reporting areas. And just very broadly speaking, we saw that there were a lot of areas where the population of color is less concentrated that didn't have anywhere near as rapid a growth in the population of color as did, a lot of the areas where the population of color is less concentrated. So one of the overall things that's happening here is, we are seeing a decrease in the amount of racial and ethnic segregation that we have between people of color and white people. At the same time, in a lot of the areas where in previous censuses, we've seen large shares of the population who are people of color. And we are now seeing those percentages go down. There's great concern about, of course, gentrification and displacement. So next, I want to plug the Office of Planning and Community Development's website. And if you go onto our office's website, right there on the homepage, there is a link that you can click to get to our population and demographics webpage. And I thought it would just be easier to give you a bunch of screenshots and links here. And by the way, I will supply this PowerPoint as a PDF, and you'll be able to click on all of these links. So I do want to highlight in particular some of the additional 2020 census data resources that we have that are available through our website. So if you were to go on our website, you would right at the top here, actually right below this orange kind of graph image thing, you will see some information about the 2020 census and then a link to it. There's also a whole bunch of other information available on demographic, excuse me, demographic trends and housing trends, permit activity, etc. So I invite you to explore this in more detail if you haven't done that already. So here I'm giving you, more links. So you'll have these at your fingertips. And one of the things that I wanted to highlight in particular is that we have a set of PDF kind of summary profiles by neighborhood that are really handy, that give you key data from the 2020 census and also show you how things have changed between censuses, between recent censuses. So I'm going to show you what these reports look like. Specifically, I am going to show you the version of this report that we have for our community reporting areas, those same areas that I was showing in the maps, but know that we also have the same data reported for urban centers and villages and also for council districts. So here I am clicking on, oops, it actually brought me to, oh, you know what? I didn't mean to click on it, sorry. What I meant to do is I meant to go to this. Hopefully you can see it a little bit better. There's a lot of numbers here, and I'll just really briefly orient you to what you can find here. So the topics on the left are the basic demographics and housing data, topics that you can find on the decennial census data that we have so far from that redistricting data set. And with these reports, we allow you to compare 1990 to 2000, 2010, and 2020. On the right side of the pages in this report, you'll see that we've calculated some change statistics for you. So for example, looking at this page for Ballard, you'll see under the change stats for 2010 to 2020, 3 different types of change statistics. Just the overall numeric change, the percentage change, so think of that as the rate of growth, and the change in the share. So when we talk about the share, the percentage share, we're talking about the percentage of the population or the percentage of housing units that have a particular characteristic, like in a pie chart. The share change is how much that sort of segment of the pie increased or decreased. I also wanted to let you know that on this community reporting area PDF, the very first page actually is giving you the summary information that aggregates all neighborhoods in the city as a whole. So you can use that as a kind of a handy point of comparison. And here I tried to zero in on some information. I cobbled this together and with lots of screenshots, so it's a little like it's not perfectly aligned, which drives me nuts. But I thought you might appreciate having the ability to kind of compare the data for the city as a whole with Ballard side by side. And one of the things that's striking is, not only how much more quickly the Ballard community reporting area grew than did the city as a whole, but also the fact that Ballard diversified a lot more quickly. And in particular, you can see that actually it was true in both the city as a whole and in Ballard. Two of the racial groups that contributed the most to the diversification were Asians and people of two or more races. So a particularly dramatic statistic. I don't know if you can see my pointer, but
Yes.
okay. So in Ballard between 2010 and 2020, the population who indicated they are of two or more races grew by over 300%. Here I have given you just a little bit of some snippets of data for the city of Seattle, for the Ballard community reporting area, and then 4 other community reporting areas that are near to Ballard. So here I've got the percentage shares of the population in 2020, and then the change between 2010 and 2020 in the shares. So again, think pie charts and how much the slices of the pie charts grew or shrank. And you can see that in the city as a whole, as well as in all of these neighborhoods, the share of the population who are white went down, while the share of the population who are Asian or 2 or more races, those all went up substantially. And there's a bunch of additional information here. I won't go into all of the detail, but I did think that you might want to have just a little bit of information, not just on Ballard, but on these other neighborhoods. And you can
very much so, Diana.
Yeah.
That's right. And also, just I guess we'll mention, because we haven't necessarily made it clear to you, but folks who are regular attendees here will know that we sort of look at ourselves as Greater Ballard, right? Mm-hmm. So we're Ballard core, where you're representing there, but we're also sort of West Finney, North Beach, Blue Ridge, Loyal Heights, Adams, Whittier Heights, Crown Hill, also importantly.
Yeah.
So yeah.
All right. Now I can tell you about the Equitable Development Monitoring Program, but I should just pause for a second to see if folks have any particular questions on the demographics that I've been talking about.
Yeah, we have had a number of questions come in through the chat, so maybe I'll try and just present a few of those, and I think some of them might be covered by the next part of your presentation, but
okay.
Let me just bring a few of these forward. Karen from Crown Hill is wondering how those neighborhood designations were chosen for the community reporting areas. Crown Hill, is an urban village that's really going to be growing, but it doesn't show up specifically in that breakdown. It kind of overlaps several of those areas. Mm-hmm. Can you speak a little bit to how those community reporting areas were chosen, or maybe how people can look at data more specifically around urban villages or other designations?
Yeah. So the community reporting areas are just sort of a geography of convenience. So we cobbled together census tracts And this was actually done before I came to the city. And you may recognize like names of elementary schools. I think that that was one of the ways that these kind of neighborhoods were assigned names. And we realized that, I'll scroll back. Sorry if this makes folks dizzy.
Oh, no, no one will get too dizzy. We're all used to this by now.
Okay, coming.
There you
Okay,
go.
woohoo. Actually, I could have gone to this one. Hold on a second.
That one was good with the focus there.
Sorry. You know
No,
what
it
happens
takes
is
a
there's
delay.
this
You have to kind
lag.
of skip slowly, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So here are the community reporting areas. So some of them have kind of funky names, I realize. We are able to give you statistics from the decennial census by urban village and urban center. And I'm going to share some of that data with you a little. Actually, let's see, what will I do? Actually, I will point to the link in here that will allow you to go. So here on this this slide, I've given you a link to the 2020 census webpage that we have on OPCD's Population and Demographics website. And if you go here, you will find the PDFs for the urban centers and villages, in addition to the community reporting areas. And we also have data by council district. And you can actually get the PDFs, but you can also get Excel spreadsheets. And there's, a whole lot, there's all sorts of calculations you can do yourself and so forth. And then there are also links to sort of reference maps and so forth as well that you'll be able to find on our website.
Great. And then let's see, Kirk has questions about displacement and gentrification, but we'll wait and let you get into that in the next part of your presentation. Amanda has a bunch of good questions here, and I'll try to jump into some of that. And then I just wanted to mention that we will let people just ask questions directly at the very end of your presentation. So if anyone who's got these questions in the chat feels like we're not getting into this enough, just raise your hand at the end, and there'll be more chance to ask questions then. But she was asking if there's a way to aggregate data for the multiple CRAs, community reporting areas, if people want to look at like Ballard, Sunset Hill, Whittier Heights, all of those together. And I think that's what you were kind of just describing.
Yes, indeed.
Tools you showed. Okay.
Yeah.
And then for the charts on percentage change, she's asking, is there a way to get an idea of absolute numbers? 1 person to 2 people might look like a large percentage gain, for example. So it sounds like people can get that from the Excel files and different links.
Yeah, and also even these PDFs, you'll see that we have the estimate numbers. So those are the sheer numbers as well. And that's a really good point. A big change may be in terms of, percentage change may not be a very large population change in sheer numbers.
Right. And then she was also asking, are the CRAs comparable and how?
Are they comparable?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, they're comparable over time. And at the same time, they do vary by size. I mean, we developed these, when was it? It was before I came to the city. So it was before 2008. Some of them have grown in population more than others have, but this is one geography that we try to keep consistent so that we could sort of show the change in the characteristics over time.
Great. And then we'll do one other question and then let you keep going. Linda was asking, what happened to the child population in South Seattle? Not a Ballard question, but.
Oh, yes. So I've also got I have some other maps that I didn't show, but here, let me go back. Oh, now I'm actually going the wrong way. Sorry about that. Okay, hold on. Okay, there we go. Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, so the child population, this is one of the concerns that I have as I look at the data. And I actually have a pair of maps also that shows the child population of color trends compared to the white child population trends. And those trends look really different. It just very broadly speaking, a lot of the reduction in the child population appears to be the child population of color declining in some of those South and Southeast Seattle areas. And I would be happy to put back those maps. I'm just writing myself a note before I send the PowerPoint over to you guys so that you can see those maps as well.
I'm curious to ask if at some point if you might touch on, I know you have data on rental housing versus owned housing, and I know that there's a real lack of family size rentals in Seattle, and so it makes me curious if part of that is just that there isn't family size rental housing available in South Seattle.
That's a really good question. It'd be really interesting to look at how the share of the rental housing that's multi-bedroom varies from, say, up towards the northern city limits versus in South Seattle. I'm not sure that it differs that much, but this makes me really curious. I can say that a broader analysis that we did comparing the city of Seattle to surrounding areas indicated that the share of market rentals that had more than one bedroom was higher outside of Seattle than in Seattle. Not surprisingly, probably. Okay, so shall I go ahead?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna keep scrolling through this. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a bit about our Equitable Development Monitoring Program. This is a program that launched about 1.5 years ago. You can access the data from it from our population and demographics website. You just scroll a little bit further down on the website. You can also find the monitoring reports under our Equitable Development Initiative information as well. There's a lot of ways to get to it. And the initial guidance for establishing the monitoring program came from a council resolution back in 2015 that called for stronger integration of racial and social equity in the city's comprehensive plan and establishment of the Equitable Development Initiative. And both the comp plan and the Equitable Development Implementation Plan both really stress the importance of monitoring as key for keeping the city accountable and making progress and advancing equity. The purpose of the Equitable Development Program is to provide an ongoing source of data that are readily available for city decision makers, to use in making program policy and investment decisions, for community stakeholders so that they can use the data in their own efforts, to plan their own programs, to demonstrate need to the city and other governmental entities, and advocate for action, and also the broader public to better understand the disparities that exist and help them gauge how well we are doing in our equitable development and comprehensive plan goals. So as I mentioned, although now it says the EDMP Equitable Development Monitoring Program launched this fall. Well, no, that's not right. It it actually launched about 1.5 years ago. It includes reporting on community indicators. There are 21 indicators spanning topics related to housing, community livability, transportation, and economic opportunity. There's a set of displacement risk indicators and a set of it's really like a website on neighborhood change where we provide historical context and also map out shifts in racial and ethnic demographics. So this is a list of the community indicators that we're reporting on. And I am just going to show you a few of these to give you a taste of the kind of analysis that's in the community indicators report. I should note that the community indicators report, it's a PDF report, but over time we want to really make it into something that's easier to update. So we're looking at hopefully making it into kind of a an online dashboard with narrative alongside on what the trends are, and hopefully also community stories that come directly from the community on what community is experiencing. A bit about the analysis that we did for each indicator. We analyzed the indicator for the city as a whole, and depending on the data that were available, we examined racial and ethnic disparities that exist in the city as a whole. And then we also did analysis by neighborhood. And in particular, we focused on what we call the race and social equity priority areas, RSE priority areas, which you see crosshatched in gold. And these priority areas came from analysis of an index that combines data on race and ethnicity, related characteristics, socioeconomic disadvantage, and disability and health disadvantage to identify where our race and social justice initiative priority populations make up relatively large proportions of neighborhood residents. So here's an example of analysis where we were able to look at disparities between households in different racial and ethnic groups within the city as a whole. That's over on the left. And then we also looked at this indicator, housing cost burden by neighborhood as well. And obviously, as you can see, it's not surprising, spending unaffordable amounts of one's income on housing is a lot more common for Black households, Native American households, and Pacific Islander households, and to some degree, other households of color. One thing that we did in the report is we also tried to drill down a bit more. So for example, there's a ton of variation within the Asian population between like South Asian, people from India, for example, and Southeast Asian population. So we tried to talk a little bit about that as well. And also, as you can see on the right, not surprisingly, the racial and social equity priority areas tend to have much higher proportions of their households who are cost burdened. We also looked at homeownership rates, and when we look at homeownership rates, both among households broadly and among low-income households, we see familiar disparities by race and ethnicity. Here's a map showing homeownership rates, which vary widely across Seattle. They're generally the highest, not surprisingly, where single-family homes are most prevalent and incomes high. So an example would be tracts in the North Beach community reporting area. The homeownership rate is quite low in comparison in the heart of Ballard. Access to parks and open space, I know that you folks are really interested in. This is one of the indicators that was selected for our Equitable Development Monitoring Program, but we're still in the process of developing an indicator that's meaningful and that we're going to have the bandwidth to measure over time on a regular basis. We are looking to potentially, we are looking to use some of the analysis that was done by a colleague of mine on the Outside Citywide project, where she overlaid lots of different aspects of access to parks and open space, as well as looking at some factors such as tree canopy in private lots and how that can sort of mediate need for public open space. And here is a map, a part of the map anyway, where she's basically put all of these different indicators together and highlighted where there is better access in the kind of the dark teal areas and poorer access in the lighter areas. And the Ballard Urban Village certainly stands out here as an area that has lower access to parks and open space. Some of you were specifically interested in sidewalk coverage, and in our report, we looked at the, let's see, I'm trying to remember exactly how we did this. We looked at road segments, and for arterial roads, we considered a street to have complete sidewalk coverage if both sides of the street had sidewalks along all of the way on each side. For non-arterials, on at least one side of the street. And we analyzed the data by our racial and social equity priority areas, looking at the highest priority areas, middle and lowest priority areas, and comparing to Seattle as a whole. And looking at this pattern, the fact that a lot of the area north of 85th Street doesn't have sidewalks. I mean, that's just sort of like overwhelms a lot of the analysis, and I'm sure is familiar with you guys, or familiar to you guys.
Right, so.
We also looked at access to frequent transit, and because we were focusing on racial and social equity, we wanted to look not just at access during peak travel times, but also travel during night and weekend hours. So you see the walk sheds that we mapped and the statistics. I won't go into detail on the statistics. With these kind of maps, I think people often like to really kind of pore over them, and all of these maps are available and more in the PDF. Another thing that we looked at is commute time. And I should note that this is a good time to note this, that the maps that I'm showing you they're all pre-COVID. And in fact, the maps that I'm showing you that are based on American Community Survey data, a lot of these come from older American Community Survey data, because those, and in particular, this is showing data from the period 2011 to 2015. It's 5-year American Community Survey data. And it's always kind of a struggle to figure out, do you use the most recent data, or do you use data that's a little bit more complete, a little older? One of the things that we really wanted to do in our report was look at the data by race and ethnicity. And the Census Bureau releases this like really detailed set of data that includes data for the smaller population groups. So for example, Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders and Native Americans. But they only like include those crosstabs in the data once every 5 years. And we had to go back to the 2011 to 2015 ACS data to do that. So, but anyway, this is showing you that average travel time to work is, not surprisingly, a lot longer in areas of the city that are further away from downtown, and also actually areas that are further away from 520. We found that 520, access to 520 was a big arbiter of how long it takes you to get to work, since a lot of people work on the east side. And let's see, I guess I don't have the chart that shows things by race and ethnicity, but I can tell you that Black commuters who commute by transit were the group that had the longest commutes of all in our analysis. So I also wanted to just very quickly tell you about the fact that we've got this displacement risk monitoring part of our Equitable Development Monitoring Program, where we look at indicators of direct displacement and more indirect displacement. So indirect displacement being when households are compelled to move, basically because of they have to move away from an area because of usually rising housing costs, or they're not able to move into a neighborhood that they would have otherwise been able to move into because of exclusionary neighborhood change and usually rising housing costs. This is a list of the heightened displacement risk indicators. The ones on the left are the ones that we're covering in our dashboard already. The ones on the right are ones that we are considering, and in most of these cases still working on. And let's see, how are we doing on time? Just checking. I do also want to show you some of the data that we can look at. And this time I am going to see if I can, sorry. Let's see if this web link works, and it's not working for me. Darn it. Well, why don't I take some more questions, and then I am going to find my way to get to these links another way so that I can show you where you can access both the Equitable Development Monitoring Program and the data that we're monitoring on housing growth for our comprehensive, for comparing to our comprehensive plan growth targets.
I'm wondering if Jody and Dawn want to pipe back up. Jody, I know that you had some questions you wanted to make sure get covered.
Yes. One of the things that I think is working reasonably well is part of it is how do you identify Ballard? And I think since a lot of this has been on maps, that's pretty good. I think the Crown Hill people will want to dig in deeper from the information that's available for them. I do appreciate all the links, and I do think that we will be very interested to know when further iterations of the data are available. So if you could keep us posted, then we can post that as an addendum to information on this meeting and other information on our website, so people will get to stay updated about that.
Yeah.
When we were talking before the meeting, there was a data snapshot from 2018. Is this something that seemed very useful? And since it's 2018, we will be able to see the changes. Do you know when that data snapshot is going to be updated?
Let's see. When you talk about the 2018 data, I'm wondering if you're talking about the data from the Urban Village Indicators Monitoring Report. And actually, I was able to, when I got out of the showing the presentation as the slideshow mode, I was actually able to go to this website that I wanted to show you. So this is our monitoring website, and you can access the Equitable Development Monitoring Program, which I was showing you. You can also access data for Urban Village indicators, and we have a report that was done back in 2018, and here's the table of contents for this. So we looked at some of the the things that the comprehensive plan has sort of the most influence on. So housing growth and employment growth, since the comprehensive plan shapes the zoning. And then affordability of housing and livability, things like access to frequent transit, presence of sidewalks, and access to parks and open space. And in this report, unlike the Equitable Development Monitoring Report, everything's analyzed by urban center and urban village. And one of the things that we are going to want feedback on as we do the major update for the comprehensive plan is, what would you like to see us continue to monitor? What is important to monitor?
Could I interrupt just a little bit?
Of
I wanted
course.
to just clarify the document that Jody was referring to. The Department of Neighborhoods had come up with a set of PDFs for different neighborhoods, like a front and back 8.5 by 11 sheet, and it had different things like number of languages spoken, or percentage of people with a bachelor's degree or higher, how many people are unemployed, just different kind of fast facts by neighborhood. I'm guessing it was for the urban village of Ballard. It just says Ballard. It doesn't define.
Yeah, they actually they define neighborhoods. It's one of those things where they define them in ways that are convenient too.
Well, it's confusing. People who live in Ballard, I don't think we think of ourselves as being just the urban village. And all the other, anyway.
Usually those are groups of census tracts as well, although they might not be exactly the community reporting areas. And I do know that they're interested in updating them. I don't know exactly what the timeline is. I know that they are intending on updating them.
I have one more area that we had talked about. there were some statistics on people who were in non-institutional facilities, but it wasn't clear. And part of this has to do with, we want to do get continuing information on issues of homelessness.
Yes.
And
yes.
it without better definitions, it was not easy to see what this data really told us or didn't tell us.
Yes. It is incredibly frustrating that the population experiencing homelessness is not specifically identified as an individual category within the census data. That population is part of, quote, other non-institutionalized people or something like that. It's a group quarters, people who live in group quarters category. There's a lot of concern about there being an undercount in particularly that group. I mean, the number of people in other non-institutionalized living quarters went up by, I may not get this right, I think it's only 800 between 2010 and 2020, according to the Census Bureau's count. And that just, it can't be.
So if we had a list of what types of places count as non-institutionalized facilities and what are institutionalized facilities. I mean, what are nursing homes? And I mean, there's a lot of things.
I can follow up and send you some information about that. We had another series of talks that we did called I Love Census Data, and we went into some depth on that. And I will forward that information
all right
to folks. Yeah.
So so we can do more from Diana or Angie if you have more questions. I don't know where it goes from here, but that's the things that were remaining on my list.
Thank you. I think it'd be great to open it up and see if any other people attending have questions. And Dawn, I wanted to check and see if you have anything else you wanted to squeeze in first.
I don't.
Great. I see one other question coming in from the chat from Linda, so I'm just going to ask that. And then Brent, if you can keep an eye out for anyone raising their hand, this is a great time for people to do that. So Linda is asking, in addition to the presence of sidewalks, the condition of those sidewalks should be monitored. The condition of some sidewalks in Ballard, including the 58th Street Greenway, may keep older and disabled residents from getting where they need to go. I don't know if that is anything on the radar.
There was a big study that was done, I want to say in 2017, on the condition of sidewalks. That those data are indeed available on the city's open data website. I don't know if the condition is tracked frequently enough for us to include it, in a report that comes out every 3 years or something like that. But I very much appreciate that comment. And I'm going to write myself a note about providing a link to the conditions information.
Thank you. And then one other question would be, when will more specific age breakdowns be available? So the Census Bureau is planning on releasing more detailed data from the decennial census towards the end of the year. But we do have American Community Survey data. Those data are based on, they're sample estimates, not a count, but the information is still useful. So I can also
I'm writing a list of follow-up things. Note where to currently find
And that would be, you know,
breakouts.
by people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. Is that how it's typically?
Yeah, and there's even a little bit more detail groups than that. And also, of course, it's really important to look at the older population as well. I wish I could have shared with you, data from the census on the population 65 and above. So that's a data point we're going to be really interested in looking at.
Yeah, especially for Ballard, which,
Yes,
for quite a few decades had a really large proportion of seniors, and it'd be very interesting to see how that's shifting.
I don't know if folks can still see my screen. I think you can.
Yes.
I just wanted to let you know that we do have this comprehensive plan monitoring dashboard where we track both employment and housing growth since the adoption of the last comprehensive plan update. And here I drilled down into the Crown Hill residential urban village. So, and I can't take credit for developing this website. My colleague Jennifer Pettyjohn did that. But it's quite handy. You can look at urban centers, hub urban villages, residential urban villages, and it's nice in that it shows you the map and you can zoom in. It's really fancy.
Let's see, I was just checking back in the chat, and I did want to make sure there was a question earlier about displacement specifically within Ballard. And are you able to kind of give an example of through some of the tools that you've shown us, how we can learn about recent trends that way?
So I will show you how to get to the displacement risk indicators dashboard. One thing that I should note is if you're looking for a sort of overall index of displacement risk, that is actually
or not, maybe not just risk, but displacement that has already happened. Is that the same thing? Or can we see how many people have potentially been priced out of Ballard in recent years?
Well, I wish that we could see that. So the data that are available don't allow us to quantify the total number of people who've left the city who have come into the city. We can look at net changes over time. There are just a lot of there are a lot of limitations to the data. One of the things, let's see. I'm going to go back to the page. So you can look at net change over time in the number of people who are in different income groups and different races, but of course we're interested in looking specifically at who's left the city. What we try to do in the displacement risk indicators dashboard is provide indicators of risk, and then there is some data that's more like when we talk about direct displacement. Tenant relocation cases are one of the most specific indicators that we have.
Look at Ballard there.
Yeah.
Significant.
Yes. So these are households who have been displaced due to a property being either redeveloped or undergoing substantial renovation to the extent that, the tenants couldn't stay. We also have condo conversions. There haven't been very many of those lately. But look, Ballard.
Where they all are.
Ballard has a few. Foreclosures. We're going to be adding evictions, hopefully utilizing the data that the Housing Justice Project has. So that's the King County Bar Association's Housing Justice Project. They have similar maps to this, but they're based on evictions. So here you're seeing the trends with respect to foreclosures. And you can see the map showing that foreclosure rates were higher in, not surprisingly, Southeast Seattle and other areas where the proportion of homeowners that are low income is higher. And I should know, we have not been able to keep this up to date in terms of really updating this as frequently as we've wanted to. We really want to update each of these indicators on the displacement risk dashboard once a year, or in some cases more frequently, even like quarterly. I am pleased to note that we are going to be getting some help on that. We're actually hiring an associate planner to help with this. So if you know of folks who may be looking for a job starting in April or so, who have good data chops and who are passionate about inclusive planning and advancing equitable development, send them my way.
I have one suggestion for a displacement risk indicator.
Please.
And that would be the RRIO database, which is the rental registry database that SDCI manages. I think they had reported in their most recent update that there was a 15% decline in rental registries. People not renewing their rental registries. And I'm wondering, especially with, single family houses and duplexes, some of the smaller like mom and pop type rentals during the eviction moratorium, there's been concern that fewer people are renting things out, are starting to sell off properties or otherwise repurpose them. And I'm wondering if that might be, there might be some data that could be a potential indicator there if there's properties that used to be rentals and are no longer rentals.
Yes, that's a great suggestion. And I should note that the Department of Construction and Inspections is going to be doing a study on the changing sort of landscape of the ownership of rental properties. There's been some great research in like national journals about the extent to which, the really big corporate institutional entities have been buying up single family homes in particular, in many cases to rent out.
Do you know the timeline for what is that something they'll do this year, or?
They are planning on, it was actually a council budget item, and it is going to be done this year. Great. And Jeff Talent, who is a manager who manages the Rio program and some of the other programs in code compliance, is the main contact on that. And I'm also going to be advising on that study. And they're looking for a consultant to do that.
Great. And do you know when that eviction data might start to show up on your website?
Probably. Well, I actually am not sure. We may be able to fast track it, but I can tell you that in the meantime, and I can put this in the follow-up note, the Housing Justice Project has their website. A lot of evictions, happen informally when people leave, when they're even threatened with evictions. So we do need to keep in mind that sort of the official eviction data are kind of the tip of the iceberg in the data that we can actually see.
Just trying to see, Brent, do we have anyone else raising hands? I'm not seeing.
I didn't see any hands raised, Angie.
Sharon had one question in the chat that I see, which is what plans exist to involve the general public in the process to update the comp plan?
Yes.
Is that anything you can?
So
Don't
practically as we speak, several of my colleagues are working on a plan to really rigorously involve the public. And there's going to be a survey that goes out shortly. I believe that's going to be launched from our comprehensive plan website. The final slide that I have has a link to our comprehensive plan webpage. So look for that information later this month or early next month. And there's also a place that you can sign up to be, on the distribution list for communications that go out.
We'll definitely try and get plugged into that and help the city connect with our membership and folks who are connected with us. We encourage everybody to try and keep an eye on comprehensive planning because the updates are not that frequent when it's a major update, and you do have really then an opportunity to try and shape some of the things that are very critically shaping how our neighborhoods look, as you may recall from our presentation with David Goldberg and some of the design standards and guidelines work that's been done in Ballard in the past. So we'll try and provide a connection to that. And I guess we probably have time for, if anyone has it, one more question, and then we'll try and be timely with our meeting time and our agenda here.
This has been wonderful. It certainly gives us, the amount of information that you have that's available, the links, the updates that are coming is really invaluable. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so glad.
I was going to say the same thing. It's a fantastic amount of information and a fantastically obvious shortage of staffing at OPCD to really sort of translate and provide it and do this kind of work with it. So thank you for making the effort. We'll try to, because of that shortage that I'm citing, we'll try to really populate some of our internet media stuff with links and places and a bunch of the stuff that you've been referring to, and encourage everybody who is with us tonight or comes across this meeting and the information here to, delve on your own. Just clicking around on my own in anticipation of this meeting, I found there was an amazing array of the kinds of maps and data and questions answered and questions raised that we've been referring to here. So thank you again, Diana.
Yes.
We will certainly look forward to trying to solicit more of these kinds of questions going into a follow-up meeting, and then look forward to having you back in the future.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the feedback and input. And this is one of my favorite parts of my job is being able to talk with folks about the data and get feedback.
We clearly have undergone so much change here, and it really is hard to interpret how much you see of what is really how much change. It's just hard to really know statistically what it all means when you just see giant buildings popping up everywhere. So really appreciate kind of having some of the numbers, and we'll really enjoy kind of having an ongoing conversation and connection to you in the future about it to try and bring it to people in Ballard.
You bet.
Yeah.
Moving, I guess, to the close then, just want to thank everyone for coming. It seemed like the Zoom format without having to do this as a webinar worked just fine. So I think we'll probably continue along that scheme and plan. Although I will let you folks know right now that we're looking at taking a little respite for February, taking a breath. Those of us who are on the board been organizing these meetings one after another are going to try and use our next month just to do a little bit of strategic planning and looking forward into the year and talk a little bit kind of further about continuing to develop in heightened participation among longstanding Ballard District Council membership organizations or member organizations, as well as continuing to think a little bit about communication and strategic outreach that could get us to a little broader swath of the population of Greater Ballard and get people really engaged in that way, so that these tremendous meetings and opportunities we've had for interacting with each other can get to a little bit broader group of Ballardites. So encourage folks to reach out to us. You can get to me at by email at president@ballarddistrict.org. You can get to all of us by emailing info@ballarddistrict.org. And you can go on Facebook and the website, which is ballarddistrict.org again. So there are lots of ways easy to reach out and get a hold of us. We'd love to hear feedback from folks, and we're probably going to try and be reaching out and connecting with some of you from our side as well. So look forward to hearing from us probably over the next several weeks, though not in a mid-February meeting as we would normally do, and then we'll be in touch. I want to specifically thank obviously, again, Diana Canzaneri for being with us this evening. I really appreciate her time and energy to bring the data. Thanks for Claire for popping by. Please do email Claire if you might help her with her survey. I think it could go a long way to help a person out who's doing a really neat piece of work. I want to thank Don and Jody for working hard with Diana to try and make this evening's meeting happen and really raise the kind of questions that brought the data to fore. And so, yeah, thank you all. Anything last for the good of the order, anybody? Excellent. Appreciate your time. Yeah, go ahead, Don.
No, I just said thanks, Brent. Yeah.
Thank you, Don. Thank you all for being here. We'll be in touch. Have a good January.
Yeah.
Stay dry.
Yeah.